Hey guys, with college football playoffs right around the corner, I thought this would be a good time to make a video on one of the most divisive topics in all of football, the prevent defense. This year is a special year, as it marks the last 4-team college playoffs, and the competition to get into the playoffs this year was pretty heated to say the least. This year's playoffs are sure to be interesting, with the long-awaited return of the Longhorns and the Huskies. The most shocking development, other than the undefeated Florida State Seminoles not being given a seat at the table, was Alabama's placement at the number 4 spot. Alabama had to beat Georgia in the SEC Championship to punch their tickets to the Rose Bowl. Before that, in order to get into the SEC Championship, they had to squeak by Auburn at the Iron Bowl. It's 24-20, Auburn, in the last 45 seconds of the Iron Bowl. And all Auburn has to do to close out Bama and finish their regular season with a winning record is to keep Alabama out of the end zone for one more play. So what do they call? Of course, it's the prevent defense. There might not be anything scarier to see in all of sports than to see your team in the lead with seconds to close, line up with a 3-man rush in a soft coverage scheme. The idea is that since you're running a 3-man D line, your backs will heavily outnumber the receivers in the end zone, meaning they will more than likely be able to break up the pass and close out the game. It's a sound strategy, but it does give the opponent's offense one last shot to clutch out the W with a Hail Mary. And as Auburn fans found out this year, sometimes you can't prevent the unthinkable.
Near corner, it's caught! Touchdown, Alabama!
John Madden is quoted as saying, "The only thing the prevent defense does is prevent you from winning." But is this a fair assessment of this scheme? I will admit my bias here. I hate the prevent defense. But is this hatred earned, or is it just an emotional irrationality? After all, professional coaches in the NFL and college continue to use the strategy to finish out games, and they have access to more data and analytics to assist in their decision making than anyone. Surely, there must be a reason why this play is called so frequently, and I doubt it's because coaches are the yellow-bellied bastards a lot of weekend warriors accuse them of being. After all, they get paid and promoted based on how much they win. Their entire professional careers are defined by how well they can close out games and seasons. Therefore, if football coaches from all levels and leagues of the sport believe this to be a good strategy, shouldn't we be inclined to believe them? Why then, as fans, do we have such a repulsion to the use of this strategy? I myself feel sick to my stomach when I see my team play the prevent with seconds to spare. Shouldn't I trust that the coach knows what he's doing? That the defensive backs will play the ball and secure the win? I think the real reason behind our aversion to the prevent defense has more of a psychological component to it than a practical one. We all know that bubbly Sprite being poured into our heart feeling when our team was up by a score and had the other team pinned back deep in their own territory. Victory seemed assured, so close you could taste it. But after playing a soft defense for a few plays, the offense has driven down the length of the field, knocking on the door. It seemed that victory was so close, but now it's anyone's game. It's the feeling of having the rug pulled out from under you, and I think that's why we hate it so much. I think, in the big games that come down to one score, seeing the other team win with a touchdown is far more heartbreaking than watching your team lose with a failed offensive drive. As an LSU fan, I can say the past couple years have been pretty hard to watch at times due to this. Being a fan of a team with an elite offense and a shoddy defense can definitely be grinding emotionally. And this is because, in a sad sense, when our team is down by a score, and it comes down to that final Hail Mary pass, we've already accepted defeat in our hearts. So when we see that pass broken up, it doesn't punch us as much. However, when the shoe is on the other foot, and the opponent manages to win the game through a last-ditch pass attempt, it stabs us straight in the heart. This is why the prevent defense is so hated, probably why it's always going to be so hated, because we're emotionally biased against it. Every time it fails, it's like an emotional gut punch, and we reflexively look for something to blame, more often than not the play call itself. Yet we forget all the times that the prevent defense worked. In many ways, this bias is almost a reverse of the survivorship bias. Survivorship's bias' most famous example is probably the World War II plane story. As the story goes, engineers were tasked with deciding where to place armor on fighter planes. They decided, reasonably so, that they should examine the planes that returned from their missions and see where they sustained the most damage so that they could reinforce those areas. However, this failed to save more planes from being shot down. It was only after the engineers realized that they should really be reinforcing everywhere but where the surviving planes were damaged that they began to notice improvements in the plane's durability. Think about it. If you sent 2 planes out on a mission, one returns covered in bullet holes and the other doesn't return at all, you know that the one which returned doesn't need more armor where he got hit since he managed to return safely anyways. The plane that didn't return, however, you can assume was hit somewhere else, and since you can't know exactly where he was hit, you should cover your bases and reinforce everywhere that the returning plane was not hit. This same thing goes for people who want to make it as actors or celebrities or YouTubers. Instead of learning from the people who made it through the top and doing what they did, we could perhaps benefit more if we learned from the people who didn't make it and do what they didn't. In this ways, sports fans' prejudice against the prevent defense, including my own, may just be an example of reverse survivorship bias, since the time it doesn't work carries so much more emotional weight for us than the times that it does work. We can reflexively assume that the problem was the prevent defense. But the problem with this thinking is that in order for the game to have reached a point where the prevent defense fails, much bigger mistakes must have already been made. In the example of the 2023 Iron Bowl, the only reason why Alabama was in a position to go for that game-winning end zone pass was because Auburn had muffed a punt and failed to stop a 4th and inches run. Either one of these mistakes hold just as much of a contribution to Auburn's choke as the failed prevent defense. But it's easiest to scapegoat the last play of the night. This is also another reason why the prevent defense is so viscerally hated. Often, it's just a culmination of a long stream of mistakes, the cherry on top of the choke. And as our frustration builds as our team fails to put the game away play after play, the final straw is perhaps the most memorable. That being said, I don't want to give too much clearance to the prevent defense. I do, after all, hate it and think it's stupid. First of all, in these crucial clutch or kick moments in a football game, it just makes sense to apply more pressure to the QB. Even if you're not comfortable blitzing multiple backs and giving up a huge play, why not at least run a 4-man D-line? This should in theory apply more pressure to the QB without sacrificing much in the way of coverage. Oftentimes, the reason why the prevent defense fails is just because the QB has so much time in the pocket against that 3-man rush that he can bide his time and wait for the perfect opening to strike. Especially if the other team's QB is an elite. If you give him enough time, they often will find a way to win the game.
Joe Flacco is actually a very elite quarterback. He won a Super Bowl. He did it really to a certain extent with that great arm of his. I would say absolutely he is an elite quarterback.
That's not going to get it done. Flacco stepping up and throwing deep down the far sideline. Caught! Into the end zone. Touchdown, Jacoby Jones!
What I really don't understand is when they call soft coverage when the other team is pinned back in their own end zone. The pressure the QB is going to be feeling is so immense, I feel like you have to take advantage of that. And they're so far from the end zone, you can probably get by with man coverage and a deep safety. But unfortunately, prevent defense still gets called pretty frequently in these situations, allowing the QB to drive down the field with quick passes to the outside or big yardage plays up the middle. The situations where time is a huge factor is even more infuriating, as these teams are able to take advantage of the clock stoppages by running out of bounds, and the defense continues to play soft, just allowing them to do so. It's almost like the coaches want the final play to come down to a shot at the end zone. And that's just the thing, maybe they do. I've heard a conspiracy regarding the prevent defense, and since I like conspiracies, and since I will likely never make a video about this topic ever again, I figured I should at least mention it here. The general theory goes like this. These coaches and organizations know that the prevent defense is a subpar way to close out a game, but they call it anyways to make the end of the game more exciting. The idea is that if you saw a team down by a touchdown pinned in their own end zone with less than a minute to go in the fourth, you might be tempted to shut the game off right there, since clearly it's practically over at that point. But if you see the defense playing soft, you may believe that there's a chance the offense can pull it out, and you'll therefore keep watching, which means the TV networks can show you a few extra commercials and bump their ratings up a little higher. I heard this theory first on Bill Burr's podcast, and I have to say, it scratched me right where I itched. But after giving it some thought, I don't think it's a good enough explanation. Now, I'm not saying that professional sports are completely unbiased and clean. The NFL is, after all, an entertainment league, and there is certainly more than enough money coming into this industry to affect the legitimacy of games and their outcomes. However, I do believe this theory takes it a little too far. Essentially, every single coach in professional and college football would need to be in on this scheme to self-sabotage their own teams when it matters most. And I just can't believe they would do that just to keep viewers interested for a few extra minutes. The last drive in a tight one-score game is exciting enough already, and if you have already watched the game up until this point, the odds that you're going to switch it off right at the climax seems pretty low to me. At the end of the day, these coaches have their own reputations, careers, and the financial futures of their families on the line when they call these plays. And the fact that the prevent defense has only been getting more and more frequent during the last few minutes of the fourth quarter tells me there must be a good reason for that. The scamdemic taught us that trusting the experts is certainly not a good argument for why anything should be done a certain way. And I'm certainly not one of those people that thinks you shouldn't question or dislike your coach's style or play calling. At the end of the day, though, if we trust experts that put their own lives and careers on the line instead of our own, then maybe we should just assume these coaches know something we don't. And my contempt for the prevent defense may be misplaced. This is a good metaphor we can apply to lots of aspects in our lives, and one of the many lessons I think sports can teach us. Oftentimes, horrible moments in our lives are really the culmination of hundreds of earlier smaller mistakes that went unnoticed or unacknowledged. We built our houses on sand, and when the floor goes out from under us, we are quick to blame the floorboards themselves, but slower to recognize the gaping hole under them that we dug ourselves. Likewise, if your team finds themselves in a situation where their opponent could win it all with one lucky Hail Mary shot, chances are it's because they've already blown earlier opportunities to put the game away. It's easiest and most satisfying to hate the straw that broke the camel's back, but that doesn't mean we should ignore the 500-pound elephant sitting on it either. And with that, I wish the Longhorns a good playoff run and hope LSU wins their bowl game against Wisconsin. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Go Tigers. Go Tigers. We're going to hit them hard. Hit them deep again. Go Tigers. Great.
Is Joe Flacco an elite quarterback?
You know what? I will let the fans answer that question, and I will let results answer that.
Joe Flacco is actually a very elite quarterback. He won a Super Bowl. He did it really to a certain extent with that great arm of his. I would say absolutely he is an elite quarterback.